Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening. We are going to walk you through what it is like to advocate for your child with reading challenges. Really, we want you to view this as an introductory message regarding managing diagnosed or suspected reading disabilities, and that could include dyslexia for your child. So we're going to kind of go over a brief overview of what this looks like. And then if you have additional questions, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. Or if you want to learn more about reading challenges, reading disabilities, or dyslexia, we're going to include some resources in our webinar. And then we're also going to point you to our amazing podcast called the Ed Writes Unplugged podcast, where we are going to dive even deeper into all things reading disability with some experts who can give you beyond the foundational information. So if you want to say hello in the chat or the Q&A, so we know that that is up and running and working, we would appreciate it. And in the meantime, we'll give you a quick introduction of who's on your webinar today. So hello, my name is Melanie Roy. I am one of the advocates here at Altman Law. I have been advocating for 13 years now, and I myself happen to have dyslexia. I'm really, really excited for us to dive into this topic and to help you understand how to advocate for your children with disabilities. And then I also have Sarah Lotak here with us.
Hi guys, I'm Sarah Lotak. I'm also one of the special education advocates here at Altman Law. My background's in early childhood development. I'm also really excited to present this webinar because I feel like it's so important and there's so much information around reading challenges and how to support our students and children.
Awesome. All right, so as I mentioned, this is going to give us an overview of reading challenges. So this webinar is designed to provide parents with a clear, accessible introduction to educational advocacy for students with reading difficulties. The focus is on empowering parents with that foundational knowledge, practical strategies, next steps, but not necessarily diving into the legal complexities or diagnoses within reading disabilities. There are many. And if we dove into everything, we would be here for hours and hours and days and days. So this is your introductory. It looks like we have Jill Swanson here, who's from Milwaukee and a reading interventionist. Jill, we're going to want to hear from you in that Q&A with any comments that you have, because I think it'll be really beneficial for our team to hear from you. But today we're going to understand reading disabilities, including dyslexia, but not limited to, and how they commonly present for school-age children. We're also going to help you understand what your role is as a parent to a child with a reading disability and how you can effectively advocate for them within the school system, and how to prepare to have productive communication with the school team. We don't want you to be caught in a cycle of concern. We don't want you to wait and see. We want you to understand how to advocate, how to ask the right questions, and how to determine if there is a concern to move forward with support in. And then we're also going to dive into the basic educational rights that you have and support structures available to students with reading difficulties to help you have access to reliable resources and continued learning and support on this topic. Because as I said, there's a lot to cover here. This is your foundation, and we want to make sure that you know where to start and where to go next for more. So understanding reading disabilities. What is a reading disability? We get asked this all of the time from parents who have concerns, but they're not sure where under IDEA or where under the disability categories their concern falls. So a reading disability is generally defined as a neurodevelopmental disorder that substantially impairs an individual's ability to read accurately, fluently, or with adequate comprehension, despite them having an adequate intelligence, conversation, conventional instruction, and social cultural opportunities. In layman's terms, what does that mean? Their ability to read accurately, their ability to read at the right rate, and so speed and intensity and accuracy for their fluency, and their ability to understand what they're reading. It's really important that we look at all of those pieces under reading. Now, oftentimes we hear about dyslexia. It's a very common reading disability, but it's certainly not the only reading disability. There are many out there. And when you have dyslexia or a reading disability, the qualification under IDEA that you fall under is called a specific learning disability in reading. And that can cover multiple areas or a singular area depending on the student's area of need. This can look like difficulty with reading words. This can look like slow or effortful reading rate and fluency. This can look like poor decoding skills, sounding out words, having extreme difficulty, or difficulty recognizing written words. It can also look like problems with spelling, we call encoding, and a difficulty understanding phonological processing. Reduced reading comprehension that results from decoding or fluency deficits rather than a lack of language understanding. They understand the language, but they're having a hard time comprehending what they're reading while they're reading it. So these are all things that we connect with reading disabilities. Some red flags or common signs of reading disabilities. I would love for you to throw in the chat ones that you've heard, because I think we're going to see a pattern of the same one come up a lot from a lot of the parents that are watching live. Oftentimes, the first thing that a parent comes to us concerned about is letter reversals. Now, letter reversals truly are developmentally appropriate for many children, and it is not always indicative of a reading disability. However, if that is not remediated and the student isn't able to learn the difference between the letters, and continues to have those reversals beyond the developmentally appropriate sign, that is a concern. But just because your kindergarten, first grader, second grader has letter reversals doesn't mean that there is for sure a reading disability. It can be cause for concern. It can be cause for asking questions of the school team to have a better understanding. But letter reversals in and of itself, even though it's a hallmark we often see with dyslexia, alone it does not mean dyslexia. And the other common signs we see are really effortful reading. Your reader is putting so much time and so much energy into sounding out those phonemes, into trying to understand what they're reading. And when they're done and you ask them what they've read about, they have no understanding, because all of their energy is going into sounding out those words. They're not putting them together contextually to understand what it means. So when you see your reader spending a really hard time, a really long time, and having a really hard time with reading, not just initially, but ongoing, that can be a sign for sure of dyslexia. And some common myths and misconceptions that we see, part of it is that letter reversal. If there's letter reversals, there must be dyslexia. Another one that we see is, well, if we just wait and see, the student will get enough exposure and will do better. When there is a reading disability, increased exposure alone is often not enough. They need direct instruction, often in a systemic, multisensory way, in order to make effective progress in reading and to make those gains. Waiting and seeing can be really detrimental to your learner, because there's this big shift that happens in education around third, fourth grade, where our students go from learning to read at school to reading in order to learn at school. And if your learner has not developed the foundational skills in reading prior to this shift, not only are they behind at grade level when it comes to reading, they're now continuing to fall behind in other areas, because those areas depend on them being able to read to gain access to the knowledge. There are certainly accommodations that we can put in place to ensure that your student has access, but we want to make sure that we're remediating the reading at the same time as providing access to the curriculum in the other areas. And some students really need that wraparound support in multiple areas in order to make progress.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about advocating for your child and what advocacy means. So when a parent hears the word advocacy, it can feel intimidating, right? So, but what we really want parents to know is that in an educational setting, advocacy simply means understanding your child's needs, understanding how the school system works, communicating clearly with the school, and then ensuring appropriate supports are provided. So advocacy is not about being aggressive or adversarial. It's about being informed, and it's about making clear, appropriate, and data-based decisions on behalf of your child. And when we're talking about reading challenges, we really want to focus on one question when it comes to advocacy. And that question is my child or my student receiving what they need to make meaningful progress in reading? And then when we talk about that progress, it directly leads us into support, accommodations, and instruction. So the distinction of these three things is most important for parents to understand, because when a child is struggling, a school often says, specifically with reading, we're providing support, right? But what does that actually mean? So when we think about support, we're looking at extra help within the general education setting, right? So it may look like small group time, extra check-ins, extra practice, maybe some homework help. So the support is informal and flexible, and it's helpful, but it's not targeted, right? And that leads us into accommodations. So accommodations change how a child accesses their learning. It does not change what that child is expected to learn. So some accommodations that we often see are extra time, audiobooks, reduced reading load, text to speech, and these are very valuable. But here's the key, right? So accommodations help a child manage the difficulty that they're having with reading, but it does not teach that missing skill. And that's where we talk about instruction. So instruction, like Melanie said, is direct and explicit, and it's teaching to build that skill itself, right? So for reading challenges, it may focus on phonemic awareness or fluency or structured literacy, right? Or multisensory decoding instruction. We want to make sure that that instruction is intentional, it's systematic, it's skill-based, it's research-based, and it's measured for progress. So for children with true reading deficits, especially dyslexia or decoding weaknesses, instruction is oftentimes the most critical piece. So when you are advocating, one powerful question to ask is this helping my child with their reading difficulty, or is it teaching them how to read more effectively? So that question alone can kind of change the direction of advocacy when you're in a meeting with the school. And then when we talk about educational rights, right, we kind of look at two areas. So under IDEA, we know that if a child qualifies for special education, we know that they have the right to a free and appropriate public education. They have the right to an evaluation. They have a right to an IEP, an individualized education program. And as a parent, you have a right to participate in the decision making, right? So you are an equal part of that IEP team. You have the right to request that evaluation in writing. You have the right to be a part of that team, like I just said, and you have the right to understand what is being proposed for your child. Under Section 504, this protects students from discrimination based on disability. So if your student has a reading difficulty that limits their learning, they may qualify for accommodations. They may qualify, we want them to have equal access and protection from any exclusion based on their disability. So again, to kind of reiterate, as a parent who is advocating for your child, you want to ask questions, you want to request data, and you want to participate meaningfully in those meetings.
So some practical advocacy strategies for parents when it comes to advocating for their students. Being prepared for the school meetings. And what does that look like, right? How do you prepare as a parent for these meetings? The first step is gathering the data that you already have access to within your home. What does it look like when you read with your child? What does it look like when your child does homework? What does it look like when your child is reading with siblings or within the community? You want to document any effortful concerns, any frustration tolerance, any overwhelm or shutdown that occurs during those times. You want to document any areas where they really struggle. Maybe it is with initial sounds or ending sounds or blending all of those sounds together. Whatever areas you're concerned about, you want to write those down. And then you really want to communicate those concerns effectively with the school team. And how do you do that? In written communication. You want to make it clear what you're concerned about and what you're seeing. And you also want to ask them questions to help the school team understand what your concerns are and make sure that you're making your concerns known, but also learning from them, because your child is with them all day as well. So some key questions to ask before the meeting is, what supports are currently in place? What does reading look like for my child? Are we reading independently? Are we reading in a small group? Do we have response to intervention or additional supports beyond what the general education classroom is getting? Do we notice frustration or an unwillingness to participate in the reading setting. And then during the meeting, we want to ask what it looks like in real time. We want to review the data that they have. We want to ask questions about the data if we don't understand it. And then before that meeting ends, we also want to ask, what are we going to do differently after this meeting? What's changing? I brought you my concerns. We talked about what it looks like at home and at school. What are we going to do differently moving forward so that we can come up with a clear plan? When I say communicate in writing, a lot of parents ask why. I had a wonderful conversation with the teacher or a wonderful conversation with admin, and I don't understand why writing is such an important component of this. When you document your concerns and your plan forward in writing, you have it, well, documented. You can refer back to it. You can make sure that everyone's on the same page. And if it isn't enough, and you need to formalize a plan, such as an IEP or a 504, you can refer back to that communication. We tried this on this day. What does the data show? What do we have for information? What do we have that shows progress beyond that time frame? And it helps with that record keeping piece. The next practical piece of information I have for you is really diving into evaluation reports and progress monitoring. It can be really hard as a parent to understand what DIBBLES mean, what iReady means, what progress monitoring looks like for your student. And a lot of times what we're receiving is prepared for a parent, but you may not have the baseline understanding of what it means. Your best support is the school team to ask them, I received these DIBBLES and I don't understand. Can you help me understand where the benchmarks are? What is expected for the grade level for my child? And how far above, below, or within those benchmarks are they? Help understand the growth that there has been over time or lack thereof, and help understand what things like percentiles or the names within the evaluation report, average, low average, poor, what all of it means in correlation to a standardized evaluation if one has been completed, because that's going to help you understand, is there a minor concern or a major concern, and how aggressive to be with your advocacy. And I say aggressive, I just mean how firm to be about individualized instruction, not aggressive with the school team. The school team is certainly there to help support your child and to help them make progress. We want to work collaboratively with them and ask these questions to make sure that we're moving forward effectively. And then this is a hard piece as a parent, knowing when to escalate and when to pause. I say trust your gut, and I mean it. If it feels like we're not making progress, if it feels like things are not working, and you've asked the school team and they're not as concerned, sometimes it's important to get a second opinion or to escalate, meaning to include additional staff. Maybe you've spoken with the classroom teacher and the classroom teacher is not concerned, but you remain concerned. That may be time to ask for an evaluation. That may be time to ask for a reading specialist or a response to intervention team to come together, a child study team. So you can really dive into where your concerns are and why the school isn't concerned. Are they already providing services that you're unaware of? Is it developmentally appropriate? And if so, the data will show that it's developmentally appropriate. And if it isn't, if the child is below benchmark, what are we doing to help support them? And do they need individualized instruction to close that gap? The importance of parental input is huge, because a lot of times we have students who are high maskers who have reading disabilities. They want and they are capable of so much, and their inability to make progress in reading feels like a personal failing. It isn't, but that's how it's feeling. So they can try really hard in school, put a ton of effort in, look like they're okay emotionally, look like they're okay overall, and then they come home and they fall apart and they crash and they refuse to read and they refuse to engage because it's internalizing that behavior and they're struggling. The school team doesn't know that if you're not able to communicate it to them, and they're not in your home. So it's really important for you to put together your concerns and help them understand what you're seeing, because students don't always present the same way across settings, and the school team can only help if they know what's going on across those settings.
Yeah, and Melanie, I just want to add to that oftentimes parents kind of sense reading difficulties before data shows dramatic gaps. So it's really, that communication piece is really important, right? So if they're seeing that at home, it's really important to reach out to the school to see if they are seeing the same thing. Let's look at the data together. Let's see if there needs to be additional evaluations involved to determine if there is a need for additional support.
100%.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about resources. specific to supporting reading disabilities and dyslexia. And there's a lot of resources out there. So there's some reputable organizations that have some really great resources within them. So the International Dyslexia Association, Decoding Dyslexia, the National Center on Improving Literacy. A lot of these organizations provide parent guides. They oftentimes have webinars themselves, fact sheets, et cetera, to really get some of the basic knowledge on dyslexia and other reading difficulties. We also have some parent advocacy guides, right, that provide some, that may be state based in your state, that provide some free guidance or workshops or some free resources for you to take a look at to determine if your child may have these, may need more support, et cetera. There's also some really great books specifically addressing dyslexia, reading difficulties. A lot of them are based on evidence-based reading instruction. So I urge you to research some of those, but they provide some really great resources based on evidence-based reading strategies, et cetera. And then also we talk about advocacy, right? So if sometimes parents are kind of hitting roadblocks on their own, or they feel like this is too big of a challenge for them to kind of tackle, we obviously provide advocacy here at Altman Law, and we support families all the time who are experiencing these challenges and wanting support to make sure that their child is receiving what they need. And we also, when we talk about support, we also have the Advocacy Circle, which is a two-part platform that's designed to give parents and caregivers the confidence to advocate for their child's special education needs. It has two exciting features, which is a curriculum, right? A learning platform that kind of covers the foundations of special education and includes a lot of information related to reading disabilities. And then it also has an AI-powered assistant that helps kind of turn that knowledge into actionable support. It's a really great tool for parents who aren't yet at the point needing someone to come to the meetings with them, but want to kind of gain some of the knowledge to be a more powerful advocate for their child when it comes to addressing some of these needs with the school district.
All right. So the next portion is we'd love to hear from those that are watching live. If you have any general questions about what we've presented so far, or questions about reading disabilities and dyslexia, I do see that we have some in the Q&A function. If you look at the top of your screen, you should have a Q&A button that you can press, and you can add in some questions there. Sarah, I'm going to read them, and I'll have you start with an answer for the first one, and then I'll answer the second one. So the first one is, my student is doing really well academically, but my gut is telling me that their dyslexia is impacting their learning. How do I present these concerns to the school and make a plan?
Yeah, so, and we hear this a lot, right? Where that child may be masking, or the teacher themselves may be providing some accommodations without, formally having them documented. So if you do have that gut feeling, we really want to base those feelings on data, right? So we really want to look at all progress monitoring. So all related to reading. So benchmarks, state testing, grades, progress reports, right? We want to look at it as a whole and see if there are areas of concern. And then we would want to, in writing, express our concerns to the school and potentially request evaluations to look further to see if there is a disability, and if that disability requires specially designed instruction to support and make progress.
I think you hit all of the components there. I don't have anything to add other than trust your gut and look at the data. And sometimes you may just be concerned and worried, and that's okay. But if the data shows what you're concerned about, then you push harder. So the next question we have is, when should I seek out a formal dyslexia diagnosis from a private evaluator? Is it worth the time and potential money to do so? And I wish I had a quick and easy answer for you, yes or no. It is very nuanced. There are some states, I can say for sure, Massachusetts, New Jersey, where having a formal dyslexia diagnosis can be really beneficial at the IEP table. There are other states where the school evaluations and determining of an SLD in reading is sufficient to have your student receive the instruction and the supports and the accommodations that they need. So if you first have let the school know about your concerns and have in writing requested evaluation, and the school is either refusing an evaluation despite your concerns and the data that's concerning, or has completed an evaluation that is not an accurate representation of your child or that you disagree with, at that point you can seek out a private evaluator to diagnose the dyslexia. Those are sometimes. There are other nuanced times if your learner initially had a great time with learning to read, but it's now really struggling with reading comprehension, can be a little bit more difficult, or if they're in an advanced age beyond third, fourth grade, and those reading concerns are persisting, it may be beneficial to seek an outside evaluation. But it's really nuanced. So oftentimes I would recommend speaking with the school team first, obtaining an evaluation through the school team first if you can. And then if you still have more questions than answers, then diving into a private evaluation. All right, Sarah, another one for you. We have, let's see, we hear about the premier and, pre-primer. Nope. Oh, and solely effective multi-sensory learning programs and methodologies for students with literacy needs. What are your thoughts on the emphasis on these programs, and is there flexibility for effective literacy support for differing learners?
Yeah, so a lot of times when we talk about specifically curriculums to support students with dyslexia or other reading difficulties, there are a lot of um, names of programs that we often hear, right? And they are evidence-based, but there are a ton of curriculums, right? Of course, we hear about those more and we know that they are effective. But we want to make sure that if this is what our child needs, that the school is using evidence-based methodologies and to provide support specifically for dyslexia or other specific learning disabilities in reading. We often see when it is a multi-sensory based and systematic and, frequency involved, right? Because we want to make sure that it's appropriate from a frequency standpoint as well. We see a lot of progress when those things are implemented for that student. So when we talk about flexibility for effective literacy support, we can't request from the school district a specific curriculum. We just want to make sure that it is evidence-based and it's appropriate for the needs of our student.
I agree. I think a lot of parents hear Orton Gillingham or they hear Wilson and they think that's what I need. And a lot of times there are students that do require a program from or one of the programs provided by those experts. But there, like Sarah said, there are so many. I think of Duos, which is super underrated, but it's a fantastic program for learners who are not able to access Wilson or OG yet because they don't have that initial phonemic awareness, right? It really depends on where your student is struggling. And there's oftentimes someone within district who can help determine an appropriate curriculum. If you do not have that within your district because it's rural or it's just not a service that they have, you can ask if that's something that they can contract out, or if there is an expert somewhere within the district or a neighboring district that can help you determine appropriate programming. But really, we want the student to make effective progress. We don't want to get hung up on the name of the program. And we want whoever's providing that instruction to be knowledgeable about it. Okay.
Exactly.
So I have one from Erica here. She says, I am a teacher and a parent to a child with dyslexia. At the initial IEP meeting to determine eligibility, they said his dyslexia isn't affecting his learning. The data suggests otherwise. He's been well below in DIBELS since kindergarten. He is not passing school assignments and assessments. He, like the PASS or the LETRS spelling, and he's showing deficits. What do I do since he has been found ineligible? That's a great question. So as a parent and also a teacher, you may have enough knowledge to simply disagree with the eligibility, and you can potentially request an additional evaluation called an IEE, an independent educational evaluation that is done at the district's expense, assuming that you're able to agree on an appropriate evaluator and appropriate rates. And that's something that you can advocate for, certainly. That'll give you more data, and that'll also give you recommendations in terms of eligibility sometimes, or supports and a direct instruction, which would lead to eligibility. Now, a lot of times the school will say, well, they are making progress. because they are making progress in other areas, but reading is not an area where they're making progress. When I hear dibbles well below, red flag for sure. So I would want to see how they're measuring that progress and what they're comparing it to, and make sure that you have some standardized measures in there as well. And really push back on that eligibility. You have the right to, depending on when the evaluation was, either reopen evaluations or request an IEE. And Erica, you're also welcome to reach out anytime if you want to talk this through. We do have consults where we can kind of talk you through your options as well. But I hope that kind of gave you some options. All right. And then for Stephanie Baker, we have, if the school hinted on dyslexia, but didn't put it on the IEP or put it as an area of concern, what do you do?
Yeah, this is a great question. And actually, this comes up a lot, surprisingly so. Or the student may have an outside diagnosis of dyslexia, but the school's not addressing it within the IEP or noting it within the IEP. If that is the case, you would want to have it documented. It doesn't necessarily have to be part of the, when the student is classified under SLD and we're looking at it as an individualized plan, it needs to address the student's needs regardless of specificities based on that SLD, right? So we want to make sure that if the data is suggesting that your student does have dyslexia, that they are providing appropriate support for that. That would be my concern, that if it's not on the IEP, that they may not be providing the appropriate support for those deficits.
I also think sometimes the school will hint at dyslexia, but they'll put specific learning disability in reading, and I've rarely have concerns with that as long as we're providing the accommodations, the direct instruction, and the support. So it certainly is a fine line to walk. So one option too you have, Stephanie, is to get an outside diagnosis of dyslexia if that is a concern that you have and you're also seeing it in the home environment. And then I can't emphasize this enough to parents. When we're moving forward with an IEP, there is a section called the parent concern section. You own that section. You can put all and any of your concerns in there. So if you're concerned that the school has hinted at dyslexia, but it's not currently supported within the IEP, that's something you can put in your concern statement, because throughout the IEP, they should be referring back to those parent concerns and making sure they're addressing them. And if they're refusing a service that you're requesting through that, they need to explain why. They need to document that they're refusing and explain what their justification for that refusal is. And oftentimes in that process of determining what their justification is, they may change their mind. And if not, then you at least have the documentation of what they refused and why they refused it in order to push back if you continue to disagree.
Okay.
All right. So that is all for the questions that I'm currently seeing. I was slow at typing them. Let me see. All right, I thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to go over just a couple more slides real quick. So if you enjoyed our webinar and you would like to learn more, we would love for you to follow us with K. Altman Law. We have a team that you can follow up with through a consultation that is ready to help you navigate complex scenarios, answer specific detailed questions, and come up with a plan to how to get your struggling reader additional support within the school system, either through a 504 or an IEP or additional supports within the school. You can reach out and schedule a consult with our intake specialists today. And then also, if you enjoyed the webinar in general, we'd love for you to scan this QR code and leave us a feedback review on Google. This helps us, spread the word about our presentations, and our contact information is on here as well. We also encourage you to take a look at the Ed Writes Unplugged podcast for more information. Oh, I see Courtney has a question real quick too. Courtney, we'll grab your question and this will be our last one. I have a question regarding how we can support our transgender students in this climate. Courtney, that is a fantastic question that we do discuss, I believe, in one of our webinars, but not specific necessarily to dyslexia. So I would recommend giving us a follow at Ed Writes Unplugged, where we will address that further. And then I can also see, I believe the chat is going to close when I end this meeting, so I won't be able to give you a direct answer that way. But if you want to go and email kalonline@kaltmanlaw.com and include Melanie on there, it's coming up as a map. Sorry. include Melanie on there, I can get you an answer, Courtney. And then Erica, the QR code coming up as an app, a map is certainly not intentional, and I apologize for that. It was a way to respond to our Google review, and I will look into that and figure out when my link broke. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. You can just search for K. Altman Law on Google, and you should be able to leave a review that way if you would like to. But thank you for letting me know. All right. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me this evening, and we hope that you enjoyed getting a brief overview of reading disabilities and how to advocate for students with them. We look forward to connecting with you soon over on social media or through future podcasts and webinars, and we hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. Bye.